All right, in this video lesson, we're going to learn how it's possible to multiply and divide radicals. We're going to start by talking about multiplying radicals. So, step number one is you're going to multiply the coefficients. When you think about coefficients, those are where you want to think about the numbers in front. So any numbers that are in front of the radical sign, those are your coefficients. You want to start by multiplying those together first. Step number two then is you're going to multiply the radicands using the product rule. So here's that works. If you have the square root of a multiplied by the square root of b, you can write those under a single radical as the square root of a multiplied by b. Once you've done that, then you can simplify the radical completely. So that's where, kind of like what we did in section 2.1, we're then going to simplify our final answer. So let's take a look at how this works. So in this first problem, we've got square root of 3 multiplied with the square root of 15. So step number one is that we're going to write those under the same square root sign as the square root of 3 multiplied with 15. And then we'll go ahead and simplify that. So 3 multiplied by 15 is 45. So now we're going to write that that's the square root of 45. Once we've done that, it's now time to simplify. So we're going to look for a perfect square that we can divide 45 by and write it with that number as well as the number you get when you divide. The number that's going to work, 45, is divisible by 9. So we will rewrite it as the square root of 9 multiplied by the square root of 5. And then we can simplify the square root of 9 to be 3. The square root of 5 we'll leave alone. So then our final answer is 3 square root of 5. Let's take a look at another example. So we've got square root of 6 multiplied with the square root of 8. So first thing we'll do is we'll rewrite that with both of those under the same square root sign as 6 multiplied by 8. Next, we'll go ahead and multiply those together. 6 multiplied by 8 is 48. And now it's time to simplify. So we're looking for a perfect square that we can divide 48 by. The largest perfect square we can divide by is 16. And if you take 16 multiplied by 3, you get 48. So we'll rewrite the square root of 48 as the square root of 16 multiplied with the square root of 3. Now the square root of 16 you can simplify to be 4. The square root of 3 you'll leave alone. And then there's your final answer. For this next example, we're going to take a look at what you have to do when you have numbers in front of the square roots as well as inside the square root signs. So we go back to step one from the instructions earlier, tells us to go ahead and multiply your coefficients together. So if we take 3 multiplied with 2, that's going to give you 6. Then we can go ahead and multiply the square roots together. So square root of 10 multiplied with 6, I'm going to go ahead and multiply those numbers together. 10 multiplied by 6 is 60. So now you're looking for a perfect square that you can divide 60 by. It turns out that the largest that you can divide by is actually somewhat small. It's actually the number 4. So we're going to rewrite that as 6 multiplied with the square root of 4 multiplied with the square root of 15. Now the square root of 4 we can simplify to be 2. The rest we will just bring down. So now we've got 6 multiplied with 2 multiplied with the square root of 15. And then we can simplify 6 multiplied by 2 is 12. And the square root of 15 we will write after it. For this next example, we're going to be very careful with the negatives that are in front of our square root signs. In fact, it would probably be best to think about there being a 1 in front of this square root of 5. So the first thing we'll want to do is multiply the numbers in front of our square root signs together. So if we take negative 4 multiplied with negative 1, that's going to end up being positive 4. And then we can multiply the square roots together. So square root of 10 multiplied with square root of 5 is going to become square root of 50. Now, square root of 50, then we'll want to simplify. The largest perfect square we can divide by is 25, because we can rewrite 50 as 25 multiplied with 2. Remember to keep the 4 in front. And then square root of 25 will simplify to just be 5. So now we have 4 multiplied with 5, multiplied with the square root of 2. Last, we'll just multiply the 4 and 5 together to get our final answer, which is 20 square root of 2. In addition to multiplying radicals, we can also divide radicals. So in step 1, we're first going to break the radicals apart using our quotient rule. In other words, if you have the square root of a over b, that's the same as writing the square root of a over the square root of b. Next, step 2, we're going to simplify the quotient if possible. And lastly, in step 3, we're going to simplify the radicands if possible. All right, so let's take a look at an example of kind of how this works. We're going to start with a pretty easy one. So we've got the square root of 27 divided by the square root of 3. So we're going to divide those numbers. Square root of 27 divided by 3. 27 divided by 3 is 9. And then remember, we have not taken a square root yet, so that's going to stay as the square root of 9 for right now. Then we'll go ahead and simplify. Square root of 9 actually is a perfect square, so we can simplify that all the way to saying the answer is 3. All right, for this next one, where we have the square root of 49 over 9, we're going to use that quotient property to rewrite this as the square root of 49 over the square root of 9. So really all you're doing is taking that square root sign and breaking it apart between your numerator and denominator. And then we'll just go ahead and then simplify each of those. So the square root of 49 is 7. The square root of 9 is 3. So then our final answer is 7 over 3. All right, for this next example, we're going to take the square root of 216 divided by the square root of 3. So starting off, we're going to take 216 and divide that by 3, which ends up being 72. So we'll rewrite that as the square root of 72. And then we'll go ahead and simplify that. So 72 is divisible by 36. In fact, if you take 36 and multiply by 2, you'll get 72. So we will just rewrite it as the square root of 36 multiplied with the square root of 2. Because then we can simplify the square root of 36 to be 6. And the square root of 2 we'll leave alone. And there's our final answer. All right, one last example. We're going to look at the square root of 120 divided by 5. Now in this case, rather than going and writing the square root of 120 over the square root of 5, that's going to be our first step. And then we can go ahead and simplify that. If you take 120 divided by 5, that's going to be 24. So now we're taking the square root of 24, which we'll go ahead and simplify a little bit. We'll go ahead and rewrite that as the square root of 4 multiplied with the square root of 6, because then the square root of 4 will simplify to be 2, and then we'll just copy down the square root of 6 after it. All right, that is it for this section of the notes. In the next section, we're going to talk about rationalizing the denominator, which is kind of what you'll have to do if the answers don't work out as nicely as they did today. But we're still going to use a lot of things we learned about multiplying and dividing in that lesson. Until then, have a good rest of your day.